Well, the kind of journalism I do is dark journalism. It goes into those places that really the mainstream media has walled off and created choke points for certain stories that come up and then get dismissed. There's an emphasis around the black budget aerospace runaway UFO op train. And I also do quite a bit with the mystery schools. And so we got kind of two parallel tracks there. And a lot of this gets into the deep state. You're going to find yourself, whether you're studying mystery school work or if you're looking deeper on advanced technology, somehow you keep bumping into that deep state. And that deep state goes global. But the American deep state is something that we really report the most on. It's interesting because what they're looking to do is create a one narrative planet, really. And when it came to the major medical emergencies, when it came to the political situations, they can't stand conversation, they can't stand debate, because in the marketplace of ideas, very often the people who are behind these things don't have quite a majority. If you look around, even at a lot of the leaders that are going on right now, like Biden and Trudeau and people of this ilk, they don't have a lot of support. Biden surfaces maybe around 29-30%, and that's in Democrat polls that favor him. So the media is very much like that as well. Their approval rating is somewhere around 7%.
Wow.
So when we look at this, we see that they don't have enough to govern. So if they don't take control of that digital conversation, then we get into all kinds of problems. Of course, when they do that, they also run the risk of exposing themselves as a kind of McCarthyite censorship. There's so much about the UFO file right now, and the government's claiming, every day there's a new media thing like, oh, wow, we just discovered UFOs in 2017 with this New York Times article. And if you go just even a half inch deep, it's all Central Intelligence Agency. They're the people that are being quoted. They're the people who are starting the companies like To the Stars Academy, for example. And if you look at To the Stars Academy, which is one of the big purveyors of this, this is the new disclosure for UFOs, and forget about 75 years of research and the government lying. These are all fundamentally, if you look at them, 25 years at the top of the CIA directorate. That's the VP of Operations, Jim Semivan. So you're looking at the CIA coming in and saying, you know what, we can actually use this UFO thing now. We've been studying it 75 years. The National Security Act actually is coming up to a great birthday anniversary here in September. And that's going to be 75 years since the CIA got created. And their number one job, aside from overthrowing elections, is and assassinating, leaders, is that they've kept the secrecy on the UFO file. So if you go back through that, you'll find out that they've kept those 75 years, but who was active early on in protecting it? And you're going to find, you run across the top scientist at the time named Vannevar Bush, who was from around here, actually, where I am in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Bush was the head of MIT, which is about 10 minutes from here. And he was a master mason, and he kept incredible secrecy. And so when it came around time to hiding the UFO file, say around the early 40s, this is the person that they turned to. And he was working for FDR in a number of scientific endeavors and the Manhattan Project. So, this is a good guy to turn to for it. But if you go through, and this is something that we exposed, if you go through the MIT background, you're going to find his number one protege was Dr. John Trump, Professor John Trump. And that is Trump's uncle. And so that shows us that there's a background there, because when we look at Vannevar Bush as this person who ushered in the UFO file and the secrecy around it, and that's another thing about Van Bush, which is it's on the record from top physicists that this guy did this. So it's not something where people are like, well, hey, the MJ-12 documents came out and maybe they're real or not. In this case, there's an actual top physicist who came out and identified Bush as the leader of that. So to find that his top protege is Trump's uncle, and then next that he was suggested by Bush to handle the Nikola Tesla papers upon Tesla's death, suddenly the entire situation that we're in relation to the UFO file, the Trump situation, the activity of the deep state, even the FBI raid at Mar-a-Lago, everything looks a little bit differently if you have the history and context.
So was Prescott Bush involved in this, or was he busy laundering money for the Nazis?
That's true. Well, interestingly enough, this Vannevar Bush is not related to Prescott.
Oh, it's
He was
not. It's
no, he's
not.
not.
I thought we
It's
were.
just
This was the what a tentacle of the Bush crime family.
it's an accident of history that they have the same name. But they ran in the same circles for sure. I think Prescott Bush. It's pretty interesting that you mentioned that because, of course, he was at the time of World War II. He was actually running a bank in the Union Bank in New York, and his top man was the person who became the top of the CIA, which is Allen Dulles. And he was the top lawyer for this bank, and they both got raided by FDR's Justice Department for trading with the enemy. And I went deep on this to figure out why didn't Bush get any jail time for that. And of course, Senator Prescott Bush is the father of George Bush, Bush one, who's our first president, and then his son, of course, became President W there. But if you look at this, you're going to find a thread with these guys. And in the case of Prescott Bush, he was running the USO, and this was his cover. So when he got caught trading with the enemy, they didn't prosecute him because they thought, oh, it's going to be too demoralizing. And but then that became the Bush dynasty, and you're going to find them throughout history in America altering things. They're involved in the JFK assassination, Iran Contra, continuity of government. But my thing on this is it's pretty obvious that those companies were setting up Hitler. They were positioning him. There was a lot of American activity on that. You have to remember in the 30s that Adolf Hitler was kind of, the it guy. He was hosting the Olympics in Berlin, and, he was the toast of America and all these other countries. And then that whole machine that turns into Hitler taking over is pretty well funded from Western powers. So he's one of their guys. And what happens is there are companies here like IBM and all the rest of it that help him run the concentration camps and just the massive, put down of the population. So our countries were very much involved with that. And so the fact that Bush got involved, I mean, the Bush family has that history, whether it's drug running, illegal arms, and their mafia ties, that they got involved on a political basis, really, to control a number of these areas, and oil became one of the key ones. But the hidden one is exotic technology, and people don't get that in relation to this ruling political structure. That's what I'm trying to put on the map. You do such great shows on the mafia. I can tell you all about an aerospace mafia that would blow your mind.
Which takes us over back to the secret space program.
Yes.
And ARRO, which I've never heard of.
Yes, it's AARO, and that's the new UFO office. That's like Project Blue Book, Redux for 2022. And this thing was tagged on. It was brought on to the government program. So you got people like Senator Rubio, some more corrupt elements in the Senate. Kirsten Gillibrand is another one in New York. Those are Democrats and Republicans working together to get this. And it's unusual, but what they want to do is create a UFO threat operation through the intelligence agencies and create the kind of environment where, oh, there are aliens attacking us. We need all your money, and we need to blow away the traditional constitutional rules because we have this threat. Now, if you look at the things that they do in relation to emergency powers, you're going to find, the UFO threat is the ultimate card that they have in their back pocket. And that's why you're hearing so much about it, because they need emergency powers. They don't have the powers of the governed. And after the fiasco with the medical emergency and the things that they put in there with lockdowns and everything else, the popularity around these people has dwindled pretty dramatically. So the emergency powers piece is dramatic. What's bigger than a UFO emergency? That's what that AARO is all about. It's a new office. It's funded through the National Defense Authorization Act. So this is, just think of that as me saying they funded it through blackmail. Because the National Defense Authorization Act is what runs the military in America. And it's $800 billion a year on record, probably more like a trillion or two. in the black budget sense. But at least on record, we know it's 800 billion. And every president signs on to this thing. Well, these senators that are in the Senate Intelligence Committee, like the ones who set up Arrow, they're able to include and latch on things to that NDAA. And if you don't go along with it, well, you're blocking all this money. So everyone's going to have your head on a platter. So they've been running this AARO and the emergency powers directly through the National Defense Authorization Act. And every president, whether it's Trump or Biden or Bush or Obama, signs that thing. And it is completely unanimous in Congress. There's nobody who says anything. So when they say, oh, we have gridlock, we have these parties fighting each other, it's terrible. Well, these guys all get together for 800 billion at the end of every year. So don't believe
Where
it.
does it go?
It goes to the military. It's the DoD, and that includes their black projects. And now they have a UFO office, which is going to be UFO defense. So in order to have a defense, you need an enemy. And they figure, well, Iran, it's not really going to do it. They've got Russia, which they've been engaged in really ticking them off by putting NATO on their doorstep. And now you have Russia going in with Ukraine. So you have that, but they really need a big enemy and to get the kind of funding that they want. And the CIA has been working on this for decades. And now their people come out, they don't even have covers for them. They're like, I'm a CIA guy. And in the case of Semivan and another one named Ramirez, who's all over the place, John Ramirez and Jim Semivan, they come out and they say, well, we've actually had experiences with aliens. We've been taken aboard ships and things. These are CIA guys, like high-level CIA people. So in my opinion, they're building a kind of psychological operation that we haven't seen before. And so the situation is dangerous and involves real money.
So is it on the same basis as the Halliburton Dick Cheney scam that all these billions of dollars end up in the pockets of the people running these defense companies, attack companies?
Well, the defense contractors have to be satisfied. That's part of the aerospace mafia. Actually, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, they're all included in there, and they're the ones who make the nuclear weapons. They're the ones who make our tactical weapons. They're the ones who make the rockets, and they're the ones who are controlling the space program and data. So if you want something, if you want a whole database of Americans who are protesters, for example, the government doesn't hold it. Lockheed Martin holds it and lends it to the government. So it's kind of interesting. What we need to do, I think, when we look at this, if you look at a case like Cheney and Halliburton and the way that they were able to do this, Cheney's very interesting because he was part of this program of setting up the continuity of government program. And this is what I think they're planning to use for the big emergency threats. And a continuity of government is budgeted every year, billions of dollars. It's a completely hidden program in the United States. It does have links to Great Britain. And one of the things that they've been doing with the emergency powers around this is creating a whole scenario of this NORTHCOM commander, which is NORTHCOM is the military command since 9/11 that controls America. And this guy that they have in charge there now, it talks openly about UFOs, which is odd. None of them have before. But in the case of them saying, well, we have an emergency and the continuity of government needs to be activated, this guy would take over. And so I try to put him on the record. He's General Van Herk. He's the head of NORTHCOM. And he's slated to take over America with a bunch of regional governors and suspend the Constitution if there's an emergency. So originally, those guys in the government, like Eisenhower, JFK, they set it up if there was a nuclear emergency because we were in a Cold War. And they figured, well, you need this underground government for this. But in fact, they changed that. And Cheney was one of the people who changed it to just any emergency. So, cyber attack, continuity of government, here we go. So COG is something we need to catch up on really fast. This is something that has no oversight in Congress because it's too secret. And when we talk about the secret space program, it's pretty simple. I'm going to put it to you this way. If you look at the secret space program, in 1972 is the last time that we had a manned moon mission. That's 50 years out. So what do you do for 50 years in between? There's no manned programs for 50 years? No, there's definitely manned programs. You just don't talk about them anymore. So they've taken those same rules that they set up for the continuity of government program and they've applied them into space. So that's the nature of the situation we're looking at. When we see the secrecy, you're surrounded by secrecy. And what they're doing is they're getting us caught up in, oh, isn't the Ukraine thing? Or I'm pro Russia, whatever it is. And they'll get you bogged down in a number of social issues. This is how the media works. So you don't talk about what's really going on. The neocons have now moved into the Democratic side. They used to be so cozy with the Republicans, and then it became popular in Republican things to say, well, I'm getting out of foreign wars. And so now the Democrats are all like, hey, we need to go in there and face off against Russia. Well, Russia's a nuclear powered nation. I mean, this is ridiculous. They have nuclear weapons. And the idea of having an actual shooting war with them is the worst decision that you could possibly make. Besides leaving hundreds of billions of dollars behind for Afghanistan. They did this, which is they left these really high-end weapons behind there and just took off. But I think the Russian situation is particularly unique because they're on the same level with us. This is the piece that's never talked about. They're on the same level with us on the UFO file, and this is where the real battle is. Forget about a lot of the things that we hear, like, oh, there's anomalies in the air, and Congress is dealing, getting to the bottom of this. That's all ridiculous. They've worked on the program. They've figured out for 75 years this advanced exotic technology, whether it's off-world or something that was created here. They know it. They know it inside and out. So the idea that they've just discovered it and, that the CIA is going to kind of bring us to Jesus is really stretching the truth. So the UFO piece becomes a dangerous aspect of what they're doing. Also, because what they're trying to do is rush this so that they can maintain control and have an enemy. And they're trying to get everyone on board. They're like, well, they've had all these movies and TV shows about UFOs, so they shouldn't be so surprised when they get our version of this thing. And that's where they're going. And I think dangerous is the word, just like you coined the word there.
Which leads us on to CIA Homeland Security disclosure versus real disclosure.
Well, that's exactly what we're talking about. Absolutely. So what we're faced with in the media now is Central Intelligence Agency disclosure. So today, pick up Twitter or pick up The Hill or New York Times, and you'll find a little thing about, wow, Congress just said that UFOs are actually not man-made. So the only conclusion left is they're extraterrestrial. Gee whiz, So they block the issue through the CIA and the media for 75 years. And then when they want it out, they've got this version of a threat idea. They create this phony office, AARO, and they've got the Director of National Intelligence in charge of it. So, the histories around these people are very interesting. So CIA disclosure now becomes the type of disclosure that people were looking for. Say 10 years ago, you'd have people out there who are researchers who are like, I want the government to give up their records. I want these things to happen. I want to know about aliens and flying saucers because we've had them for so long. And these little things have dribbled out. But everybody knows that there's something else advanced that's flying around out there. And, that's just one of those things we know. People know that the Central Intelligence Agency assassinated JFK. It's like in the subconscious there at this point. So the idea that the government gets to keep this stuff and then create their own warped version of a disclosure is what we're looking at. And their disclosure, though, is all about this thing being a threat. And that's where the trick is, because that's where the money and the power is located. If they can convince you you're under threat, well, stay in your homes. There are aliens out there. We're going to ward them off and just forget about the Constitution. That's basically a scenario that they've been working with, but they're building it in. And whenever you look around, like here, for example, we have the Galileo Project, which is right behind me here at Harvard University. And that's Avi Loeb, who is Israeli intelligence. And all of his board was supposed to be all scientists. Well, I kept a close eye on the Galileo Project, and all the board are, again, it's all CIA people, including this fake whistleblower, Elizondo, and the guys like Christopher Mellon, who are, really millionaires. And so we're looking at some very dodgy figures involved in this.